So, hello, comrades. We have September, and next week, the USA will celebrate anniversary of the attack to the Afghanistan. It is 2020 anniversary, so we will speak about other 11 September, also connected with USA, prepared by the CIA. So it is coup d'état in
Put.
Chile.
Yeah,
Putsch?
the
No,
coup.
coup. I
Yeah,
think that
coup.
it's
Yeah.
coup. So Bruno, let's start.
Yes, of course. Chile was something very important, of course, for Chileans. But before we talk about Chile, maybe we have to remember the fact that after the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of Soviet Union under Khrushchev, began the theory that socialism can be built through a peaceful way, through the elections, and that a revolution, an armed revolution, like it was the case in Russia and other socialist countries, was not necessary to have socialism. And of course, this theory was taken by a lot of communist parties, especially in Western countries, in so-called Western democracies. But as you know, there were never such a situation when communists were enough strong to take the power in any so-called liberal democracies, even if sometimes they could participate in different government, like after the Second World War in France or in Italy, for example. But we had no example of socialism or an attempt to create socialism through one election. So that's very important, because in this case, Chile was an attempt to create this type of road to socialism. And for a lot of people, especially for the leftist and especially communist parties, who supported the idea that you don't need armed struggle, you don't need to have a people's militia to take power, you just have to respect the bourgeois constitution and just win the election, and then step by step you will go from capitalism to socialism. And Chile was a good example of that, at least at the beginning, before the Allende government arrived to power, because Chile was an exception in Latin America. Latin America at the time was, of course, all the Latin America, except Cuba, of course, were under American hegemony. But the case of Chile was, to a large extent, very specific, because we can say that Chile was a, quote, civilized democracy, functioning like all Western democracy. We can say, of course, that the Chilean system, political system, was to a certain extent very similar to to the political system we had in Western Europe or in North America. And when left parties in Chile decided that they can go the way to promote socialism through elections, they were convinced, quite a lot of them at least, were convinced that it was the years of détente between Soviet Union and United States, and that the old, let's say, bourgeois habits to use army when people and popular forces are strong, it's an old time, and in the new time, everything can be set up by legal means, and especially Chile was supposed to be the best example because of its so-called democratic traditions. And a lot of people believed in that, and that explains why there was the creation of what is called the United the People's Unity, with quite a lot of political parties, especially with the Communist Party and the Socialist Party. At the left of this, you had little groups, especially the MIR, which is the movement for a revolutionary left. This Marxist organization didn't believe that socialism can be introduced in any country just by election, but you have to have people's mobilization and people armed. But apart from this group, which was a rather tiny group, most of the Chilean left were convinced, more or less, that the democratic traditions of Chile are so strong that there is no chance that if they win the election, they will have, they will lose. The country will be the bourgeoisie and the conservative parties will not accept the result of the election. So that was one of the, let's say, basic hypotheses of the left in Chile, and they forgot a lot of things which will happen, which will be remembered, if I can say like that, later. First of all, that's right that Chile was a very old, let's say, liberal democracy in Latin America, and that Chile was, to a large extent, an exception. And that's right. Chile was a country which could look like a normal, let's say, quote, European society, but it was not so right, because Chile was still a third world country. If we talk about economy, Chile was also a, let's say, half feudal countries. If we look at the landowners' property in the countryside, and Chile was also a country which was conquered by Spanish conquistadores, and the local native people, especially the Mapuche, who were the Indian living in the south of Chile, were in a very bad situation, and they had been kicked out of their land, and they were under strong pressure from the old, let's say, colonial powers. So Chile was, to a large extent, a country with a facade of liberal democracy mixed with something that was still third world and feudal or post-feudal, and of course we have to take that into account. Another point which is very important is that the Chilean army was, of course, looking like a very respectful army toward institutions and constitution. But the other side of the medal is that it was an army traditionally trained by Prussian officers. It was a real German-like army in Latin America. Even the helmets the Chilean soldier was still wearing in the 70s were the Wehrmacht. In Germany, the German army of the Federal Republic of Germany, after the Second World War, they didn't wear the helmet of the Third Reich army, but in Chile they did, which is something, of course, symbolical, but symbolic means something. it was a really Prussian-looking like army. The uniforms, the colors, the helmets, the training, the ideology of this army was the ideology of the German army, the Imperial German Army, and what is worse, Chile, as other countries of Latin America, were countries where a lot of former Nazi escaped after the Second World War, and you had quite strong German immigration with strongly right wings, and even we can say Nazi ideology, and they were very linked with the higher bourgeoisie of Chile, and they were also very linked with the Chilean army. And we have also to take that into account. That's the general situation when the Allende government, the People's Unity government, arrived in power. And we can say that this government didn't arrive in power in the best situation, since the Chilean institutions were not really stable, in the sense that we had in Chile always more or less three main political trends. The left I told you about, the right wing, which was the National Party, and in the middle you had the Christian democracy. And traditionally in Chile, up to Allende, up to 1970, you had competition between Christian democracy and the right wing, and the left was out of power, I would say. And the situation that happened in 1970 with the creation of the People's Unity, with almost, as I told, left parties, was that they had the capacity to win the election, but they had no capacity to win the majority of the vote. The electoral system can give the majority to a party without having the absolute majority in the parliament, and that's something very important. And on this, at this moment, there were quite strong opposition in the left. Should the left compete alone or not, taking into account the fact that within the Christian democracy, it means the centrist party, you had in fact two trends. The main trend, the historical trend, was the, let's say, center-right trend, very similar to the Italian or German Christian democracy. It means something like liberal Christianity, liberal in sense economical liberalism, and also, of course, social conservatism with some, let's say, Christian caritative initiatives. But in the social democracy, in the Christian democracy, there was also at that time a trend which was linked with what is called in Latin America the Liberation Theology. It means a leftist interpretation of the Bible and of the Christianity. And for some people in the left, the candidate of the Christian democracy, Tomic, was a rather progressive Christian, and some people in the left thought that it would be much more intelligent to support this candidate to be president and not push let's say, openly secularized leftist to compete and become the president of the country. But at the very end, the People's Unity decided, after a large debate, to promote their own candidate, and it was, of course, Salvador Allende, who was the candidate of the Chilean left, and he won the election. But he had no majority in the parliament. In the parliament, the People's Unity had only a little bit more than 36% of the vote. So they were the first political group in the parliament, but they had no absolute majority. In spite of that, the Allende government decided to promote the peaceful way towards socialism, and it took a real progressive decision on social decision, economical decision, a lot of very different decisions, including the nationalization of copper mines, which were the biggest, let's say, product of Chile. And we have to take into account that in spite of the fact that from the very beginning of the People's Unity government, this government was under strong pressure from outside and inside. From outside, of course, by the United States, and from inside by the Chilean bourgeoisie, promoting, of course, manifestations and different forms of disobedience toward the government. And all that in a situation in a tense economical situation, since the inflation began to rise and so on and so on. But in spite of that, at the last democratic election we had in Chile, the People's Unity government, as I told you, had only 36% of the vote in 1970, but in 1973 they could have 46% of the vote. Still not the absolute majority, but still they conquered quite a lot of the vote, much more than earlier. The main problem, of course, of the government was how to govern, because, as I told you, the situation was very difficult, and we can say that the big bourgeoisie, the big enterprises, the CIA, the American CIA, and a lot of other elements inside Chile and outside Chile organized complete sabotage of the economy and of the political institutions, creating very complicated situation. And you understand this as a very complicated situation, especially when you see the truck strike. Because now we know, I mean, there is no doubt about it, that the striking truck drivers were organized and paid by CIA. And this strike was, of course, very important, because this strike, let's say, destroyed the Chilean economy. If you look at the map of Chile, you understand very easily that Chile is a very, very long country, from very far north to very far south. And this country is unable to live without a communication, because it's not a mass territory, it's a very long country. So when truck drivers strike, it's all the economy which is disorganized. Of course, in every country, when trucks are on strike, it disorganizes economy. But in Chile, it's not only let's say a bearable disorganization, it's a vital disorganization. The country can just live with such a strike. So it was a very, very strategic point to organize truck driver strike. And of course, this strike was possible because CIA organized it. And of course, because truck drivers, it's petit bourgeoisie. They are supposed to be owner of their truck. And the government planned to organize the nationalization and creation of a national truck enterprises. And of course, as petit bourgeois, they wanted to defend their property, not taking into account the fact that the development of capitalism will destroy them anyway later. But of course, they had no class consciousness, because, of course, the left was very, very weak in this milieu. But the Americans were very aware that they choose the good ones. They choose the strategical element of the Chilean economy, and they used it to paralyze the country. And they really managed to do it, and they succeeded in the complete disorganization of the economy. And of course, the idea is always the same. When you disorganize the economy, people are mad, and when people are mad, you tell them it's the fault of the government, it's the fault of the communists, it's the fault of the revolutionaries. Situation is worse and worse because of them, and you just have to kick them out, and then the country will be flourishing. And it's a very interesting this period, because we observed that for the 3 years of Allende government, the level of class consciousness did improve all the time. It means that the workers and the peasants and the Indian or Mapuche Indian and a lot of, let's say, marginalized social classes understood more and more that there is something like a class war, and that the economical difficulties they are dealing with, or they are trying to deal with, are not the responsibility of the government, but of class enemies from within and from outside. But, this competition still was organized in a bad moment, I would say, because we cannot say that the majority of the Chilean people were aware of that. The minority of the Chilean people was growing more and more. And I think that the Chilean bourgeoisie, and I think that the American imperialists, they realized that if they cannot kick out the Chilean government of Allende very soon, Chile will become a socialist country with a majority of the society going on the side of the left. So it was, a question of time, and the American had no time, but they, as I told you, they had on the short term, they were the strongest. As I told you, they disorganized the economy, but they accelerated the process of destroying socialism in Chile by using army. They had, as I told you, the Chilean army was a German-looking army, but of course it was a German-looking army strictly coordinated with the US army. And before the coup of Pinochet in September 1973, there were military games between Chilean army and US army that strengthened the relation of the two armies. But of course, Now it's obvious. At the time, it could not look like that, but it's obvious that it was a preparation of the coup d'etat by the American with the help of the Chilean army, and there, of course, we can say that the left, the majority of the left in Chile, was to a certain extent quite naive, because they were really believing that a military coup in Chile is impossible because it's an old democratic, so-called democratic country with democratic traditions and so on and so on. So the let's say the minority of the left in Chile was aware that you cannot have power not controlling armed forces. But the idea that you had to mobilize people, that you had to give them arms to defend the socialism was not it had not the majority of the left. So on the one side you had armed forces, and on the other side you had people more and more aware that something like a class struggle is existing, but still not aware that you should arm people and especially workers to defend the so-called democratic institution. And of course, what I'm telling was under debate not only in Chile. It was, of course, also in debate in Cuba, because Cuba cooperated, of course, very strongly with the Chilean government, and they knew much more. They were much more clever and much more conscious of the dangers. But even Soviet Union, at the very beginning of the let's say Chilean experiments, Soviet Union helped financially Chile, giving some money to the Chilean government to help him at the very beginning. But at the end, they didn't. And why they didn't? Because for two reasons. One of the reasons was that part of the Soviet leadership was convinced that the interest of Soviet Union is to maintain good relation with Nixon, because Nixon was the president of the United States, and they negotiated quite a lot of different things all over the world. And part of the Soviet leadership thought that it's more important to have good relation with Nixon than to support a government Nixon is hating. So that's one of the reasons. But the other reason, on other part of the Soviet leadership, they were, let's say, old-minded. I mean, they were thinking exactly like pre-Khrushchev Soviet Union. And you had some Soviet leaders that were telling it's useless to help Chile, because Chile cannot succeed, because it's impossible to make revolution without armed forces. So if you want to make revolution just through election, it has no chance. And if it has no chance, why spend money, something that the American will anyway take? Because, you know, inside the Communist Party of Soviet Union, like inside the whole communist movement in the world at that time, there were a very strong debate if it was possible to promote socialism through peaceful way or not. And you have this split inside Soviet Union also, because of course let's say the Khrushchev point of view and the Stalin point of view were opposing each other. And Chile was the symbol in the world of this idea socialism can win by peaceful way. And that's why, of course, a lot of people in the whole world were very, let's say, very hoping that the Chilean example will be the one that will allow people of the world to hope that you can have socialism without revolution. And of course, you had more realistic people and communists, especially in third world countries, that were thinking it's pure nonsense, it's pure idealism, it has nothing to do with the reality. Anyway, we can say that the Chilean example was a bad example, of course, but still an example, because it failed. And the American organized, as we know now, directly the military coup. We know now that American warships were on the coast of Chile, and they were leading the coup. Of course, the Chilean army realized it, but under the, let's say, supervision of American militaries. So the coup, of course, was organized by the General Pinochet, which is, of course, a very well-known figure, and the symbol of the dictatorship Chile will have after the success of the coup. So he realized it. And what is very important is the fact that with very, very, very little exception, all the army realized that coup. The army was, there was no problem with any side of the military, except the chief of the navy was arrested, but let's say the whole army went behind the Pinochet coup, and they managed to control the country very quickly, which is, of course, the proof that if workers, especially workers, have no arm, it's impossible to promote socialism. And we can say that the Chilean coup made people aware all over the world that socialism through election is impossible. And that's why after the Chilean coup, you will have in the communist movement two answers. The first one, the oldest one, of course, is that revolutionary have to do revolution if they want to have not only the support of the masses, but the masses armed so they can take power and hold it. And you had the other ones. It means what will be called later the Euro-communist, and especially under Berlinguer's Italian Communist Party, who, out of the example or counter-example of Chile, decided that, well, communists and left by themselves cannot take the power. We don't want, they don't want to use, let's say, traditional revolutionary tools. So we have to make a historical compromise. It means to create a government of unity of the left and center-left, center-right bourgeois parties to promote some slight reforms that will progressively, very, 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 with very, very long time, push society in a rather left direction. That was the theory of the historical compromise, which in fact led the Italian communists to change even their name later in Democratic Party and to look like the American Democratic Party and the party of the system, of the establishment, and anymore and no more Marxist and of course revolutionary. So the Chilean example was of course a tragedy, because we estimate that about 30,000 people were killed, exterminated, let's say, after the coup. The whole left was repressed. We had a terrorist government for a lot of years. A lot of Chileans immigrated. It was pure horror, but still, what we have to take into account, comparing with other countries, the leftist party, and especially the Communist Party, didn't disappear during all the time of the Pinochet dictatorship. This party is organized in underground, and they never disappeared. And now we see it now in Chile that the Communist Party is a growing force. Still, and a very important force in the political situation of Chile now. But of course, in between, we had the terrorist government of Pinochet for a long time. He was repressive and so on. But what is also very important to take into account is the fact that Chile was the first experiment of neoliberal policies. I mean, what we call the Thatcherism was first introduced in Chile and later in different Western countries. But Chile was the laboratorium, which we can say, of a liberal right-wing government, neoliberal right-wing government. And that's why the Pinochet government is something very important to study, not only because of the very tough political and police repression. Of course, it's very important, but also it has to be studied as an example of extreme economical and social counter-revolution. When Pinochet arrived in power, he privatized everything. I mean, everything was privatized in Chile after Pinochet. Hospitals, communication, everything has been privatized in Chile. Universities, school, everything. And that's also why in Chile, Chile had a quite big railway system. But now in Chile, you have very few train and railway because they were privatized and most of them disappeared. So now you have 3 or 4 train or railway, I think, line. When at the time of Allende and earlier, you had all the country linked with trains. So the neoliberal experiment went to its extreme consequences and was hailed by a lot of liberals, let's say, like, for example, Thatcher. Thatcher was not at all disgusted by the political repression in Chile. She was enthusiastic about the so-called economical result of the Chilean dictatorship. It means, of course, economical result, taking into account the interest of the big bourgeoisie, taking into account the interest of very big privatized enterprises, but not, of course, of the broad masses of the Chilean population. Now, the situation of Chile is that Chile doesn't produce anything except what it has underground. It means, of course, mining, but there is no such thing like Chilean industry. I mean, Chile now is a much more third world country than it was at the time. And what you buy in Chile is mostly always imported from outside. So it's a so-called success stories for importers, for all the bourgeoisie living of importation, but it's pure comprador economy, and that's the result, of course, of the Pinochet dictatorship. So if we look back at all what I said, we can say that the idea that socialism can be promoted through purely institutional and peaceful way is the best way toward fascism, repression, neoliberalism, complete privatization, and destruction of every aspect of, let's say, localized national economy. So Chile is a very, very, very interesting experience. Negative, mostly, but not only negative, since, as I told you, now situation in Chile is improving after years of terror, of course. But anyway, the Chilean people managed to force the government now to elect a constitutional assembly, to write a new constitution, much more left-oriented. Communists are very strong, and in a lot of cities, especially in Santiago, in the capital, they hold the town hall. So I would say that in spite of all the negative things I said, Pinochet didn't manage to destroy communism and socialism inside Chile, and that's the positive aspect of that. It means that as soon as the Chilean dictatorship failed, the left rebirthed. But now, of course, the situation is very different because the communists and the socialists are not allied in the popular unity movement. Socialists are much more right-wing than they were at the time, and communists took a lot of influence within, let's say, former socialist electorate and population. And what I think is the result, I mean, I think Chile knows now that if they want to have a leftist policy, they need to be mobilized. They need to create a balance of power and a balance of force that will make the bourgeoisie fear. So, I mean, they are much more their class consciousness now is much better than it was during Allende time. And on this point of view, of course, Allende is a hero. We cannot deny that. But he made the basic error, I think, is it's a kind of naiveness that it is possible to take the power from the bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie will accept it peacefully. The bourgeoisie will never give up power when they are not forced to give up power. That's more or less, I think, the main aspect I wanted to say. I don't know. Maybe you have some question.
Yes, I have one question. I have a lot of questions, but first question, we spoke many times about the other third world countries, and in these other third world countries like Libya or Burkina Faso, the army was a leftist force. And in Egypt, in the time of Nasser, there were also the officers from from Nazis, from third right, and how could you explain that in these other third world countries the army is leftist force, and in the Chile the army is right-wing force, and for example also in Venezuela in the
Yeah.
Chavez also he came from army. So what is the difference between Venezuelan army and Chilean army?
I would say paradoxically, Chile was a slightly more developed third world country. And it's very important. Of course, it was still a third world country, but it was not, let's say, the same third world country like Egypt, like Burkina Faso, like Venezuela, like Bolivia, Peru, and so on. And that's the basic one of the basic difference. It means in a very backward countries, army is very often the only way for people coming from lower classes to improve their situation. It's even the case in United States today. It means that we have to deal in the United States with something like we can call third worldization. But anyway, that's another issue. But if you look at traditional neocolonized countries like Bolivia, like Venezuela, like Libya, like Burkina Faso, you understand that people like Sankara, like Nasser, like Gaddafi, like Chavez, and so on, they are people coming from lower classes, and they had two choices: accept the poor situation they have and try to survive, or go to the army. And they went to the army. But, they had, at the beginning, most of them were not really class conscious. But still, they had something like a class instinct. And little by little within the army, they began to understand what we can call class consciousness. And they, let's say, went back to their social roots, to the class they are belonging to. And that this pushed them toward revolution, or let's say toward socialism. In Chile, the situation was slightly better. But what a slightly better situation doesn't mean it's a real slightly better situation. What I want to say by that is that in Chile, you had, of course, very poor people, but you had a more, let's say, advanced economy. And quite a lot of Chileans from lower classes could imagine that they can advance socially through other means than army, through university, through fabrics, factories. Inside factories, they could be promoted and so on. So the army was not the only way to get out from lower classes to upper class, let's say, to lower middle classes. So the army was something like a caste, and could be something like a reservation of old traditionalist, ultra-conservative people. And of course, in the case of the Chilean army, as I told you, it was reinforced by the fact that it was a Prussian trained army. With Prussian style, with German style, with this hierarchical, very very rigid way of thinking, behaving. All the mythology linked with the German Reich was inside the Chilean army. and it created a specific culture. And this explains why in the Chilean army you had no Chavez, no Sankara, no Nasser, no Gaddafi, etc., etc., etc. And that's the point. Left in Chile didn't understood. Allende didn't understood that in fact superficially. Chile was a more advanced, democratic, liberal country and society, but with a very, very strong reactionary elements, which are typically third world reactionary elements, mixed with modern German Reich education, modern and archaic in the same way, because what we can call Prussia, as one side of the medal of Prussia is very modern, and the second side of the medal is that Prussia was a very archaic, ideologically speaking, state. And the Prussian influence in Chile was, of course, very important. Not only in the army, of course, in the army, but not only in the army. I mean, you had in Chile German farms, German immigrants who organized, let's say, mini Hitlerist states inside Chile. You know, big farms with a lot of workers, and the Aryan chief with all the myth of the pure race, and you know, you had mini fascistic state inside the Chilean democratic, so-called democratic society, and of course, this mini fascistic state, a German state, took a very active part in the coup. And especially in the repression of communists and you know, and so on, because you know, when you have a SS man coming from the Third Reich and asked by the government to repress the communists inside Chile, he will do it because he did it in Soviet Union during the Second World War. So he just made the same things in Chile. I mean, he feels very fine with that, and he knows how to do that and to organize that because he has the experience. He did it during the Second World War. And that's why we have something like a pure hypocrisy of the Western so-called democracies, because as I told you, Pinochet introduced neoliberal Chicago boys ideology, Thatcherist ideology. He used openly Nazis, but Western democracies and especially neoliberals never accepted formally the idea that Pinochet was their child, in fact, and that they are really linked with that type of regime for Chile, but later, I mean, the experiment of Chile was used by Thatcher in England, was used by Reagan in the United States, and we can say now in the world, we are living under Pinochet style economy because he first created that type of economy. And now we have a Pinochetization of Western economies.
Okay. I would like to ask you, where have you been in the time of the putsch of the Pinochet?
I was in Poland. I remember the day of the putsch. I remember very exactly because I was going to my course at the university, and I bought and I went out from the student hostel, and I was going to the tram, and on the road I bought Tribuna Ludu, which was the United Workers' Party organ, and I opened it in the tram, and it's the headline is Fascistowski Putsch w Chile. fascist putsch in Chile. And I remember it very well. And later, a little bit later, I mean, maybe 2 or 3 months later, Poland accepted quite a lot of Chilean refugees. And I remember the first Chilean students coming in Krakow at that time that were receiving, of course, political asylum in Poland and began their study. And they were from different political groups. Some were communists, some were socialists, some were MIR. It means the group I told you about, the radical left group I told you about. And I had a lot of contact with them because I was organizers of the foreign students in Krakow. So I had to organize their coming, their material situation, but also to ask them to organize meetings, reunions, talking to Poles, talking to other foreign students, what's happening, what did happen in Chile, describing the situation in Chile, organizing concert of Chilean students. They were singing very profound, very beautiful revolutionary songs. I remember something which was, at that time, Poland was not the Poland we know now. I remember when I organized the foreign student delegation to every year in Poznan, you had the foreign student singing festival. And I remember a Chilean girl there who was singing a song about Allende. And it was a very beautiful song, but it's not the most important. The most important was that she was so impressed that at the end of the songs, her voice couldn't push words. And the whole stadium, they were mass, I don't know, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people. They began to stand up and they shouted, "Down with fascism, down with Hitlerism," and it was Poland like at that time. It was something completely different after. But in the 70s, people in Poland still remembered what was the Hitler occupation. So, they understood what she was, showing and from which hell she's coming from. It's unforgettable that those moments, because you feel that, all the world can be united in one feeling, and that people in Poland could imagine what hell she had in her own country, and it was a time people in Eastern Europe and especially in Poland. People were talking about Chile, about Cuba, about Angola, about China, about Vietnam. People were interested what's happening there, what's happening here, what's happening in Egypt, what's happening in Central Africa. People then at that time, they were really politically, I don't say that all Poles were like that, but quite a lot were very interested by that. Even they bought books, and you had books about Chile, you had books about Cuba, you had books, and you had discussions, and I organized some discussion, and you had hundreds and thousands of people coming and discussing what is the best way to build socialism. Is the Cuban socialism better, or the Polish one, or the Soviet one, or the Chilean ones, or the Vietnamese ones, and so on and so on. It was completely different. 10 years after, it was all eliminated. in most of the heads. But I remember that Poland, and basically speaking, that's my Poland. That one, the one existing now, it's not Poland for me. It's something I don't know. It's a Generalna Gubernia now. It's not Poland. I mean, I don't know. To explain in English, Generalna Gubernia, it means it was the name the Nazi gave to Poland during the occupation.
Okay. I would like to ask you, when the counter-revolution take place in Poland, Wałęsa, he thanks to the Bush and to the Reagan that I am president because of you, because your help, because your money, because you are with me. How it was with the USA and Pinochet? Because today everybody knows that the CIA prepared the coup. But in the time when you were in Poland, it was the mystery, or everybody knew?
It was obvious that the United States did support the coup. I wrote a lot of I read a lot of articles about that. Of course, we had no official American documents about that. Now we have them. They just confirmed what was obvious earlier. But it was already, at that time it was known that American officers were in Chile. It was known that the truck drivers strike receive funds from CIA. All that was already known. Now we have, of course, much more information. But at that time, it was obvious that the United States were behind that. So, of course, I think Wałęsa could not know that because he was not an intelligent man. He doesn't know nothing. So I mean, he maybe doesn't know now at that time, but he for sure didn't know that Chile is existing. But Wałęsa is somebody which is on the lower intellectual level of the Polish society. I mean, yes, of course. I mean, they choose him because he's a dumb man. I mean, I knew quite a lot of workers in Poland at that time. They were 100 times more intelligent than he was. I mean, I was talking with workers about Chile, about Vietnam, about things like that, and they knew about it. Wałęsa maybe didn't know. But he was chosen because all these opposition workers they were chosen because they were the most uneducated ones among them, because they could be manipulated. The more intelligent workers were not were put aside. And of course, money helps a lot. So when money arrived from the United States, of course, some people went behind such man like Wałęsa. But in a normal society, in a society which would not be under corruption coming from the West, Wałęsa would have been workers to the end of his life. He would never have been the man we know that was the president of the republic. He's. I mean, I know that quite a lot because I wrote about that in my book on Solidarność. That when Wałęsa came in France. Just in let's say, I think September 1981, he was received by French trade unions, and the leader of the French CGT trade unions was Henry Krasucki, which is a French workers, of course, but from Polish origin and knowing Polish language and knowing Polish history and so on and so on and so on. And when he received Wałęsa, the leader of the French trade union, gave a course to Wałęsa about Polish history, because Wałęsa didn't know that. You had to have a French worker from Polish origin to teach Wałęsa what he was supposed to know. I mean, after all, he finished school in Poland, so he should know things, basic things. And Krasucki was his teacher, quote teacher. I mean, so how can you ask Wałęsa to understand Chilean things? I mean, he couldn't. He was just waiting what the American tell them, and Reagan was okay because Reagan helped him to get to power, and that was fine, and that was the American dream, and so on and so on. The only thing he knew is that Japan is supposed to be a success story, and Poland has to be a second Japan, which is pure, nonsense. But that's something else. It's a shame that such people can be, known all over the world for no reason. In fact, I mean, he has Nobel Prize. I don't respect the Nobel Prize. It's a pure bourgeois shit. But anyway, it's supposed to be, something very special. And, such a dumb man like Wałęsa having Nobel Prize, I mean, it's a shame. He didn't understand nothing. So, I mean, and the best example is that when he arrived to power, he was supposed to correct the neoliberal policy introduced by Balcerowicz, which is the Pinochet policy, because it's the same. By Balcerowicz, it's the Polish Pinochet. Exactly. I mean, he is a copy of Pinochet ideology and of Chicago Boys. But Wałęsa didn't know nothing. So as soon as he was elected, he took back Balcerowicz, and he put the policy of Balcerowicz still in Poland, and the destruction of the Polish economy was introduced on the same line as the destruction of the Chilean economy earlier was introduced.
There is a comment here. JZ1. I am just reading Vijay Prashad Washington Bullets on the CIA overthrowing and killing socialist leaders. He points out it cost only 8 million to overthrow Allende. Churches in Chile welcomed Pinochet's coup. They said that the overthrow of Allende was God's answer to the prayers of all the believers who recognized that Marxism was the satanic power of darkness. Could you say some details about this coup? Because now when the USA prepared the color revolution, there always have what?
It's different. I mean, the United States did learn, because whatever I said earlier that the Chilean coup d'état was a success, technically speaking, that's for sure. That it created laboratorium and so on, and this can be, from the point of view, of course, of neoliberal, considered as a success, and from the point of view, as you say, that of the Chilean very conservative church, also it was a success, like it was a success for the Chilean army. But in the same time, Chile became a symbol all over the world. The brutality of the overthrowing of a, let's say, democratically elected government, constitutionally, and so on, was so disturbing for a lot of people, not only leftist people, but quite a lot of people that were believing that democracy is the future of humankind, and that the barbarian habits cannot come back, and fascism is something that was behind us, and so on and so on. It shocked a lot of people all over the world. And Chile became a symbol. Even, I would say, sometimes it became a symbol not entirely objective, in the sense that, for example, the Argentinian military junta killed much more people than the Chilean one. And the Indonesian military junta killed 1 million people, when in Chile there was only, quote, 30,000 people. So, I mean, to a certain extent, we can say that it's unjust that all the humanity at that time knew about the horror of Pinochet, but forgot the horror of Suharto, of Videla, of Stroessner, of Duvalier in Haiti, and so on and so on and so on, Mobutu in Congo, and so on and so on. But Chile became an example, because Chile was the only real liberal democracy that was destroyed by a right-wing coup. So it became a symbol all over the world. And, you know, this had an influence, because quite a lot of people did discover at the occasion of this coup that the constitution is not a shield against dictatorship, and that the legal institutions are nothing if they don't have arm on their side. And that's very important. That was a very tough experience. But to a certain extent, we can say it's a positive experience. I mean, I remember all over the world, I mean, in Poland, but it was the same in Paris. You had a lot of reunions, of meetings, of manifestation concerning Chile. I mean, Chile became the symbol of something that cannot be accepted, and that's important, you know, because the subjectivity of what happened in Chile changed the mind of people who were still believing that liberal democracy is a stable institution. Now we know that liberal democracy can be overthrown in one night or in one morning, in the case of Chile.
I will read one more commentary. Evo Morales wrote preface to this book. Times have changed, and business is no longer carried out in the same way, but the underlying methods and the response of imperialism have remained largely unaltered.
That's right. The only difference is that, of course...
Wait. Bolivians know these perverse politics well, long before our 14 years at the head of the plurinational state of Bolivia. We have had to confront the operation threats and retaliation of the US.
Yeah, that's right. But the difference is that the Bolivian did win. I mean, of course, they had a coup, they had a counter-revolutionary government, but it didn't stay long, because Bolivians were mobilized, and they were organized to fight against the dictatorship the American wanted to impose on Bolivia. And maybe to a certain extent, we can say that it's because of the Chilean experience. And people in Bolivia know that you have to be prepared for struggle if you want to really change a situation, and if you want to really realize a socialist society. You cannot do it without organization, discipline, mobilization, and arms.
Okay, but it is not first time when we have putsch. We have
No,
example
but it
of
was one
Spain.
of the first time we had putsch in a supposedly stabilized democracy.
Yes. But my question is, Allende was in power 3 years.
Yes.
And I heard that in the time when he was in the power, there was also the radical militia in the province, which starting to make the land reform. And
Yes.
it was not the order of the Allende. It was something.
Yeah, it was either the Indian organization, the native organization, either the MIR. It means the movement for revolutionary left, which was more left than the government. Of course, some people later in Chile will say they were too extremists and it's because of them that the coup happened. But you have other people who said they were conscious that you have to create a balance of power in favor of masses, and that unfortunately other leftist group and party didn't manage to organize people's movement. It's a very complicated debate, but I think personally, I think that if you want to promote socialism, you need to have a knife in your pocket, or maybe not a knife, a Kalashnikov. It's better.
Yes, but did Allende?
Yeah, he was
thinking.
He was considering that the extreme left was a bad thing, and he was against them.
He was against extreme left.
Yeah, because he was thinking that they are creating tensions that will lead the country to confrontation, and that a compromise is possible with the right wings. And the compromise was not possible. The history told us it was not possible, because class struggle is class struggle.
Okay, and you already said something about Soviet Union. The Soviet Union didn't wanted to help the
at
Chile.
the beginning they helped, but at the end they didn't.
Yes, but the attitude of Cuba was different.
Yes, of course. Cuba helped from the very beginning to the very end, and Cuba, let's say, Fidel Castro told to Allende that he must be aware that without arm and without mobilization, he will be in a very bad situation. I mean, Cubans were very, 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 very conscious. And Allende, he didn't really, he loved them, but he didn't really hear them. And that's why, for example, in Venezuela, why the Venezuelan government was not overthrown? Just because the Chavez understood that, and as soon as the the Bolivarian revolution began, he asked Cuban to organize his security services. I mean, the security services in Venezuela are under Cuban command, because they know in Cuba that when you do revolution, it's something very serious, and you have to be prepared to fight for it. So that's why security services in Venezuela are under Cuban command, because Cubans are very conscious people. They know the price of revolution, They paid for it, and they pay for it up till now because they have blockade. And they knew that the Allende experiment was a very sympathetic one, but not very realistic one.
And the China and Mao, he thought what about Allende?
And,
That he was a revisionist?
Now, that's the problem with China, because, at that time, China had begun to have had begun to have relation with United States. That's one thing. The second thing is that the Chinese were convinced from the very beginning that the experiment, the Allende experiment, is irrealistic. So they decided not to react when the Pinochet coup d'etat happened, because for them it was obvious that that a coup d'etat will happen. And that's the reason why they recognized even the government of Pinochet. They had diplomatic relation with Chile under Pinochet. That was the only socialist country that didn't severed relation with Pinochet. The Chinese embassy was always during Pinochet time, because the Chinese looked at that. The Allende experiment was unrealistic, so don't care about that, and just continue to make business, and don't take into account what happened in Chile, because it was obvious it will happen this way. And that created quite a lot of tension within the Latin American left, because quite a lot of people in the Latin American left considered that the Chinese betrayed left in Chile. Even if they criticized the Allende methods, they should have criticized the coup. But the Chinese didn't criticize the coup. They considered it's an internal affair of Chileans. And before you had the bourgeois government, because Allende was not a real communist and socialist, and Pinochet is also a bourgeois government, so don't care about Chile. And of course, this reaction was not really appreciated by Latin American leftists. You can understand. It was the time when Deng Xiaoping was coming back to the policies in China also, and the Nixon was negotiating with China at that time. So the Chinese decided that it's much more important to have relation with Nixon than to protest against the military coup in San Diego.
And the Maoist left in Western Europe.
In where?
In Europe, Western Europe.
I mean, of course, formally they criticized the coup, but nothing more. I mean, they were not really. They were not really, for them it was not really important what happened in Chile, because the peaceful road to socialism was for them impossible. So it was, they had a quite cynical relation toward what happened in Chile because of that. Of course, there was a Maoistic group in Chile, which was called the Communist Revolutionary Party of Chile, who was against the Allende government at the time, and he was pushing for more radical policies. And of course, after the coup d'etat, they were also underground. And they were also fighting underground, but it was a tiny group which was not really important.
Okay, it is very, very interesting. What did you say about China? Because I think that I will study this question. because now I have a lot of discussion with the Maoists,
Yeah,
and
but you have different Maoists now. You have the Maoists who consider that China was socialist up to 1976, and you have the Maoists who consider that nowadays China is socialist, and these two Maoists are opposed one to another. So
no, no, no. I am speaking about these Maoists who think that it was socialist before
okay.
1976. So from this point of view, every time they said that the Soviet Union betrayed the revolution, and China of Mao, it was the only country who have relations with the.
They are right up to 1971.
Hmm.
In 1971, China began to have a relation with United States, and between 1971 and 1976, the last 5 years of life of Mao, China had a policy which can be considered very, very differently, let's say. Of course, it's also linked with the fact that the diplomacy in China was mostly under the leadership of, let's say, right-wing party leaders, because the left-wing party leaders were rather concentrated on internal policies in China, and not so strong on the external one. So it's quite difficult to say, and it's difficult in this situation to know exactly what was Mao Zedong thinking of that, especially that he was old and sick at that time. But of course, the last 5 years of Mao's life are troubling, let's say troubling, for strict revolutionaries.
Okay, so thank you, Bruno. Uh, I hope that in this anniversary on 11 September, we will not only speak about these things which happened in New York, because it is the same date, and if this theory that the United States it is the because officially it was Bin Laden who made this terrorist attack,
Yes, of
but
course.
there is theory that it's United States attacked themselves. So
You, or at least let Ben Laden attack them.
okay, but if it is true,
Yes.
maybe they will choose the date because they, they wanted to
Yeah,
not
yeah. To make people
forget about
about
Allende.
that's but that's kind of hypothesis, maybe, but I don't know. But still, everything is trouble. But anyway, they have now difficulty to celebrate, let's say, the 9/11s of Ben Laden, because they were defeated 20 years later in Afghanistan. So it's for them also a bad date now. Say they will have to do something else for another 9/11.
Yes,
I'm
but
joking.
the Afghanistan now is different story. It's but it is how to say it's for my point of view it is happy end
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I
that
think so. I mean, anyway, it's a defeat of imperialism. Whatever will happen in Afghanistan, it's a defeat of imperialism in Afghanistan, and that's the most important point.
I can say that I read a short article about one guy who was a minister in the Afghan government in
Now
Kabul.
the former Afghan
Yes, this who collaborated with
with the
NATO.
Americans.
Yes, and now he is a livrer of pizza in
Oh yeah,
Leipzig,
yeah.
Leipzig, and that. and it was a scandal in newspaper. How it is possible that the minister
Minister.
is he's liver the pizza, and from my perspective, it is he's
Very
honest.
good.
It's very good.
Yes. Yes.
I hope that every minister in Poland he will
Yeah, yeah,
repent.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
He,
think that now he is more sympathetic than he
Mm.
was when he was minister. I mean, at least he's a normal human being, working class and working for people and not against them.
Oh, Bruno. Now in the chat is the comrade from the USA, but with the Nicaraguan origin,
Ah,
Ramiro Sebastian Funes, and
yeah.
he prepared a good video about presentation about the Sandinist revolution,
Ah,
Sandinist in Nicaragua. So
that's very
I.
good. Yeah, yeah. Nicaragua is a very good country. Little country, but hard one.
Yes. So he made a video about the revolution, but also he was there in, I don't know, last holiday.
Yeah.
So
It's
every
interesting.
time, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
because we know about Nicaragua, but we don't know the detail of what's happening exactly now in Nicaragua. We know more or less, but it would be good to know a little bit more. But anyway, the American look they are not able to overthrow the Nicaraguan government as they did in Chile, and that's quite interesting.
Okay, so thank you, Bruno. Wait, I will finish this.
Yeah.